I never thought I'd be the kind of man to write something like this. I always believed in commitment, loyalty, and trust, especially when it came to marriage. You vow to be with someone through thick and thin, to stand by them when times are tough, and celebrate with them when things are good. But sometimes, you don't see the cracks in a relationship until it's too late, until you're forced to confront a truth so ugly that it shatters everything you thought you knew. That's where I found myself, staring at the remnants of a marriage that had already disintegrated without me even realizing it. Her name is Emily, my wife for the past 15 years. We met in college, back when the world seemed wide open, and our futures felt infinite. She was different then, bright-eyed, full of passion, curious about the world, and I was drawn to her like a moth to a flame. Her laughter was infectious, her spirit unbreakable, or so I thought. We got married young, which now, looking back, feels like one of the first mistakes I made. But at the time, it seemed perfect. We were in love, naive, and utterly convinced that we could weather anything together. For most of our marriage, things were steady. Not extraordinary, but solid. We had a nice house. Both had good jobs. Me in finance, her in marketing. And we lived the kind of suburban life people write about in novels. On the surface, everything was fine. We didn't have kids, which, looking back, was probably a blessing in disguise. Emily had always been focused on her career, and I respected that. We agreed we'd try for children one day, but that day never came, and after a while I stopped pushing for it. Maybe that was the first sign, the first of many that I ignored. Things started to change about a year ago. At first it was subtle. Emily began spending more time at the office. Late nights, weekend meetings, business trips that seemed to come out of nowhere. When I questioned her about it, she waved it off, saying it was just part of her new promotion. I wanted to believe her, so I did. I trusted her. Why wouldn't I? We had built a life together, shared everything. I never thought to question her fidelity, but then, the changes in her behavior became impossible to ignore. She was always distracted, barely present when we were together. Our conversations became shallow, superficial. She stopped making eye contact, stopped touching me, stopped even pretending that she cared about the things that mattered to me. The physical intimacy was the first thing to vanish. At first I thought maybe she was stressed. I asked her if something was bothering her, but she brushed me off, said I was overthinking things. But I wasn't. I knew something was wrong. Deep down, I knew. The final blow came on a Friday evening, when I found her phone on the kitchen counter. She was upstairs taking a shower, and for some reason, something in me told me to pick it up. I had never done that before, never once looked through her phone. I trusted her. But that night, my gut told me something was off, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. My hands were shaking as I unlocked her phone, scrolling through her messages, and there it was, a text thread with a man named Brian. I didn't know a Brian, but clearly she did. The messages were explicit, detailed, leaving no room for doubt. My stomach churned as I read through weeks, months of conversations between them. It wasn't just physical. There were declarations of love, plans to run away together, talk of a future without me. I felt sick. My hands were sweating, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. She had been cheating on me for months, maybe longer. All those late nights, those business trips, it was all a lie. My wife, the woman I had loved, trusted, and committed my life to, had been betraying me behind my back while pretending everything was fine. I could hear the water shut off upstairs, the sound of her moving around in the bathroom. She had no idea that her entire web of lies had just collapsed in my hands. I felt a rage build inside me, a kind of fury I had never experienced before. It wasn't just about the cheating. It was the deceit, the utter disregard for everything we had built together. I was furious, but I also felt defeated, broken. I thought about confronting her right then and there. I wanted to scream at her, demand answers, make her explain how she could do this to me. But something stopped me. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was the realization that no matter what she said, it wouldn't change what I had just seen. The damage was done, and no amount of explanations or apologies could undo it. I didn't say anything that night. I couldn't. I needed time to process, to figure out what I was going to do next. Confronting her right away would give her the power, let her control the narrative, and I wasn't going to allow that. I needed to be smart about this, careful. I needed to take my time and figure out how to take control of the situation. I wasn't going to let her walk away from this unscathed. Over the next few days, I pretended everything was normal. It wasn't easy, but I kept my emotions in check. I smiled when I needed to, made small talk over dinner, kissed her goodnight even though the thought of touching her made me sick. I played the part of the clueless husband while quietly planning my next move. I wasn't going to be the victim in this. No, I was going to make sure that Emily paid for what she had done. I started by gathering evidence. I took screenshots of the messages, saved them to a secret file on my computer. I followed her when she went out on one of her so-called business trips, tracking her to a hotel where she met up with Brian. I watched from the parking lot as they embraced, kissed, walked into the hotel together. It was like a punch to the gut, but it also fueled my resolve. This wasn't just a fling. This was a full-blown affair, and I was going to make sure it blew up in her face. Once I had enough evidence, I started thinking about how to exact my revenge. The thought of simply confronting her seemed anticlimactic. She had destroyed my trust, shattered our marriage, and I wanted her to feel the same pain she had inflicted on me. I wanted her to lose everything, just like I had. And so, I started putting my plan into motion. First, I met with a lawyer. Quietly, discreetly, I wanted to know what my options were, how I could protect myself financially in the divorce that was inevitably coming. I made sure to document everything, including her infidelity, so that when the time came, I could hit her with the full weight of the evidence. She wouldn't see it coming. But that wasn't enough. I didn't just want to leave her. I wanted to ruin her. I knew that if I played my cards right, I could make sure that she lost not only her marriage, but her job, her reputation, everything she held dear. It would take time, but I was patient. I was willing to wait for the perfect moment to strike. The next step was gathering information on Brian. It wasn't hard. His name was plastered all over Emily's messages. A little digging revealed that he was married too, with 2 young kids. Perfect. I reached out to his wife, anonymously at first, sending her the evidence of their affair. I didn't hear back from her right away, but I knew that once she saw the proof, her marriage would be in shambles too. I wasn't just going to destroy Emily's life. I was going to take down Brian too. As the weeks passed, I continued playing the role of the oblivious husband, all while my plan quietly unfolded behind the scenes. Emily had no idea what was coming. She thought she was getting away with it, that she could keep lying to me, sneaking around with Brian, while I remained blissfully unaware. Little did she know, her entire world was about to come crashing down. The day I finally confronted her was a day I'll never forget. It was a Saturday morning. She was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone, probably texting him, completely unaware that I knew everything. I sat down across from her, sliding a folder across the table. She looked up, confused, and I could see the wheels turning in her head, trying to figure out what was going on. "What's this?" she asked, her voice casual, but there was a flicker of unease in her eyes. "Open it," I said, my voice calm, controlled. She hesitated for a moment before opening the folder. Inside were the screenshots of her messages with Brian, along with pictures I had taken of them at the hotel. Her face went pale as she flipped through the pages, her hands trembling. "I know everything," I said quietly, watching as the reality of the situation sunk in. "I've known for a while now." She looked up at me, her eyes wide with panic. I can explain." "Don't," I cut her off. "I don't want your explanations. I don't want your lies. I just wanted you to see what I know. To know that your little secret is out." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no remorse. She had made her bed, and now she was going to lie in it. "We're done," I said, standing up. "I've already spoken to a lawyer. I'll be filing for divorce on Monday. And just so you know, I've sent everything to Brian's wife, so I'm sure he'll be dealing with his own mess soon enough." Emily stared at me, speechless, her face a mixture of shock, guilt, and fear. She opened her mouth to say something, but I didn't wait to hear it. I turned and walked out of the house, leaving her to sit there in the ruins of the life she had destroyed. That was the last time I saw her. Our divorce was finalized a few months later, and I moved out of the house we had shared for so many years. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I had wasted too many years on someone who didn't deserve my loyalty, and now it was time for me to move on. Revenge, they say, is a dish best served cold, and in my case, it was. I didn't scream, didn't lose my temper, didn't even raise my voice. I simply let her feel the consequences of her actions, let her world crumble around her, the same way mine had. In the end, I didn't feel triumphant. Revenge didn't bring me the satisfaction I thought it would, but it did bring closure. It allowed me to walk away, knowing that I hadn't been a victim, that I had taken control of the situation and made sure that she paid for what she had done, and that, more than anything, gave me the peace I needed to move on. Life goes on. In the months that followed our divorce, I found myself drifting in a kind of emotional limbo. The intense focus I had maintained during the months of planning my revenge had kept me grounded, kept me going. I had invested so much time and energy into making sure that Emily and Brian both got what they deserved, that once it was over, there was a strange emptiness in its place. I hadn't anticipated what would come after the legal paperwork, after the confrontation, after the final signatures were made on the divorce documents. I still remember the day I officially moved out. The house, which had once been full of life, felt hollow. I didn't take much with me, a few pieces of furniture, some clothes, the essentials. It wasn't so much about the physical things. It was the memories that haunted me. Every room had a story. The kitchen, where Emily and I used to cook together. The living room, where we'd spent countless nights watching movies. The bedroom, where intimacy had once been a given, but had eventually died a slow, painful death. As I loaded the last of my boxes into the back of my car, I took one final look at the house. It wasn't the house that had failed. It was us. Or rather, it was Emily who had failed me. I knew I was far from perfect, but I had been faithful. I had tried. And yet, that hadn't been enough for her. For weeks after, I wandered through life in a daze. I returned to work, buried myself in my job, and tried to ignore the empty feeling in my chest. My colleagues didn't know about the divorce yet. I hadn't told anyone. I wasn't ready to face their pity, their questions. So I pretended everything was fine, just like I had when I first discovered Emily's betrayal. One day, as I was sitting at my desk, mindlessly shuffling through emails, a message popped up on my phone. It was from Brian's wife, Karen. She had contacted me a few weeks ago, shortly after I had sent her the evidence of the affair. At the time, she hadn't said much, just that she was devastated and thanked me for telling her the truth. I had expected her to file for divorce too, but I hadn't heard anything since. I opened the message, curious about what she had to say now. Karen. Hey, I know we haven't talked since you sent me the messages about Brian and Emily. I just wanted to let you know that I'm filing for divorce. It's been hard, but I thought you should know. I hope you're doing okay. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. I stared at the screen, unsure of how to respond. I hadn't spoken to Karen since that initial message exchange, but her words struck a chord with me. She was going through the same thing I was, betrayed, hurt, and trying to figure out how to move forward. In a way, she was the only other person who truly understood what I was feeling. After a few moments of hesitation, I typed out a reply. Me. Thanks for letting me know. I'm sorry you're going through this too. It's been rough, but I'm managing. I appreciate the offer to talk. Maybe we can meet for coffee sometime. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. It wasn't that I was looking for anything more than a conversation, but I figured it might help to talk to someone who was in the same boat. A few minutes later, Karen responded. Karen, coffee sounds good. How about this weekend? And just like that, we made plans to meet up. I didn't know what I was expecting from the encounter, but part of me hoped that talking to her would help me process everything. Maybe she could shed some light on Brian's side of things, or maybe it would just be nice to vent to someone who understood the mess I was in. That Saturday, I arrived at a small coffee shop near my apartment. Karen was already there, sitting at a table by the window. I recognized her from the photos I had seen online. Petite, with dark hair and soft features. She looked tired, though, like someone who had been carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders for far too long. When she saw me, she gave a small, tentative smile. I returned the gesture, feeling a mix of awkwardness and empathy. We were two strangers brought together by the same betrayal, and yet, in a way, we already knew each other's pain. Hi, I said as I sat down across from her. Hi, she replied, her voice soft. Thanks for meeting with me. No problem, I said. I figured we both needed this. She nodded, taking a sip of her coffee. Yeah, it's been rough, to say the least. We sat in silence for a moment, both of us unsure of where to start. Finally, Karen spoke again. I don't understand how they could do this to us, she said, her voice cracking. We were married for 10 years. We have kids. I thought we were happy. I know the feeling, I said, my own bitterness surfacing. Emily and I were together for 15 years. I never saw this coming. Karen looked down at her cup, her fingers tracing the rim. Do you ever wonder if it was something we did? Something we missed? I shook my head. No, this isn't on us. They made the choice to cheat. They could have talked to us, could have tried to fix things, but they didn't. They lied. They betrayed us. That's on them, not us. She nodded, though I could see the doubt in her eyes. I know you're right. It's just hard to accept. I keep thinking about all the moments that led up to this, all the little things I ignored. I feel like I should have seen it coming. I could relate to that. I had spent so many sleepless nights replaying every conversation, every interaction with Emily, trying to pinpoint the exact moment our marriage had gone off the rails. But in the end, it didn't matter. The fact was, she had chosen to betray me. She had chosen Brian over me. We talked for over an hour, exchanging stories, sharing the hurt and confusion that came with discovering our spouse's infidelity. It was strangely comforting to know I wasn't alone in my feelings, that someone else out there understood the whirlwind of emotions I had been grappling with for months. By the time we parted ways, I felt a little lighter, like some of the weight I had been carrying had lifted. Karen thanked me for listening, and I thanked her for the same. We exchanged numbers, promising to keep in touch, though neither of us was sure what that would look like. It wasn't like we were suddenly going to be friends, but there was a shared bond between us now, something neither of us could deny. Into the weeks that followed, I found myself thinking about Karen more often than I expected. I wasn't interested in her romantically. My heart was still too bruised for that, but I couldn't deny that talking to her had helped. We texted occasionally, mostly to check in on how each of us was doing with the divorce process. Hers was messy, thanks to the kids and the shared assets, while mine was relatively straightforward. I felt bad for her, knowing that she had a much harder road ahead, but there was little I could do to help. One evening, as I sat alone in my new apartment, nursing a glass of whiskey, I got a text from Karen. It was late, and I wasn't expecting to hear from her, but I opened the message anyway. Karen, are you busy? I stared at the screen for a moment before typing out a reply. Me. No. What's up? Her response came quickly. Karen, I can't stop thinking about them. It's driving me crazy. I could feel the desperation in her words, the same desperation I had felt in the weeks after discovering Emily's affair. The endless cycle of questions, the sleepless nights, the constant replaying of what went wrong. It was enough to drive anyone mad. Me. Yeah, I know the feeling. It's hard to shake. There was a pause, and then her next message came through. Karen, do you ever think about confronting him? Brian, I mean. I've thought about it, but I don't know if it would make any difference. I hadn't expected that. I hadn't thought about confronting Brian directly, not after everything had already come to light. But now that she mentioned it, the idea sparked something in me. I had never really gotten the chance to face him, to make him see the damage he had caused. He had taken something from me, my marriage, my trust, and I had never held him accountable. Me. I've thought about it, but I don't know if it would change anything. Karen, maybe not, but I feel like I need closure. I don't know how to move on without it. Closure. It was a word that had been floating around in my head for months, but I wasn't sure if it was something I would ever truly have. Could confronting Brian really give me that? Or would it just dredge up more anger, more pain? After a long pause, I replied, Me. Maybe it's worth a shot. The next day, I found myself standing outside Brian's office building. It was a sleek, modern structure downtown, the kind of place where people in expensive suits made important decisions behind glass walls. I hadn't planned on confronting him so soon, but once the idea had taken root in my mind, I couldn't let it go. I took a deep breath and walked through the revolving doors. The receptionist barely glanced at me as I approached the front desk, her fingers clicking away on her keyboard. "Can I help you?" she asked, not bothering to look up. "I'm here to see Brian," I said, my voice steady. She finally looked up, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but he'll want to see me," I said, hoping I sounded more confident than I felt. She raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. "And you are?" I hesitated for a moment, then decided honesty was the best approach. "I'm his mistress's husband." Her eyes widened slightly, but to her credit, she didn't miss a beat. She picked up the phone, dialed an extension, and spoke quietly into the receiver. After a few moments, she hung up and gave me a tight smile. Go ahead and take the elevator to the 7th floor. He'll meet you in the lobby." I thanked her and made my way to the elevator, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it. I was about to come face to face with the man who had destroyed my marriage, and I had no idea what I was going to say. When the elevator doors opened on the 7th floor, Brian was already waiting for me. He was taller than I had expected, with sharp features and a perfectly tailored suit. His expression was one of mild surprise, but there was something else there too. Something like guilt. We stood in silence for a moment, just staring at each other, neither of us sure how to start. Finally, Brian cleared his throat. "I assume you're here because of Emily," he said, his voice low. I nodded, my hands clenching into fists at my sides. "Yeah, you could say that." Brian sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, I'm sorry for what happened. I never meant to." "Don't." I cut him off, my voice cold. "Don't try to apologize. You knew exactly what you were doing." He opened his mouth to respond, but I didn't give him the chance. The anger that had been building inside me for months finally boiled over, and I stepped closer, my voice rising. "You think a simple Zari is going to fix this? You think that's going to make up for what you did? You ruined my marriage. You destroyed my life. And for what? Some cheap thrill? A few stolen moments with my wife?" Brian took a step back, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "I know I screwed up. I know I hurt you. And I'm sorry for that. But Emily, she wasn't happy. She told me." "I don't give a damn what she told you," I snapped. "You had no right to get involved. If she wasn't happy, she could have talked to me. We could have worked it out. But instead, she chose you." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with bitterness. Brian looked away, his jaw tight. I didn't want it to happen like this. I didn't want to hurt anyone. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Well, congratulations. You succeeded in hurting everyone." We stood in tense silence for a long moment, neither of us knowing what to say next. Finally, I spoke again, my voice quieter this time. "You took something from me, Brian. Something I can never get back. And I hope someday you realize what that really means." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving Brian standing in the lobby, his expression a mix of regret and resignation. As I stepped out into the cool evening air, I felt a strange sense of relief. Confronting him hadn't given me the closure I thought it would, but it had given me something else, an ending. I would never truly understand why Emily had done what she did, and I would never be able to fully erase the pain of her betrayal. But now, I could finally start to let go, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. I've always considered myself an average guy. I grew up in a small town where everyone knew each other's business, got a decent education, and eventually settled into a comfortable career. Nothing fancy. I never thought my life would be the kind that could be ripped apart by scandal. Yet here I am, about to share the story of how my world came crashing down and how I rebuilt it in the most satisfying way possible, by taking ultimate revenge on my cheating wife. Her name was Sarah. We met in college, and everything about her seemed perfect at the time. She was smart, beautiful, and had an infectious energy that drew people to her. When I first saw her in the library during our sophomore year, she was sitting at a table, completely engrossed in her textbook, her dark hair falling over one shoulder. I found myself staring longer than I should have, and when she finally looked up and caught my gaze, she smiled. That smile. That's what did it. I was hooked. We started dating, and soon enough, I was head over heels. We graduated together, got jobs in the same city, and within a couple of years, We got married. I thought we were the perfect couple. Our friends envied us. We had the dream house, the dream jobs, and everyone who knew us thought we were living in this fairy tale marriage. But they didn't know that the cracks were forming beneath the surface. The thing is, Sarah changed. Over time, she became more distant. At first, I thought it was work stress. She had taken a high-pressure job at a marketing firm, and I figured the long hours and tight deadlines were getting to her. But then, she started working late, more often than not. Her weekends were suddenly packed with work events and client meetings, and while she always had an explanation, something in my gut told me that something wasn't right. But I trusted her. Why wouldn't I? We'd been through so much together, and I never imagined she'd betray me. So, I let it slide. The first real red flag came when she went on a business trip that I later found out wasn't exactly business-related. One night, while she was gone, I was sitting at home, sipping a beer, and scrolling through Instagram. I came across a post from one of her coworkers, Jenny, who had posted a group picture from a bar. There was Sarah, my wife, sitting in the corner of the photo, her arm casually draped around a man I didn't recognize. I wasn't sure what to make of it at first. I mean, it could have been innocent, right? But the more I looked at it, the more uneasy I felt. I tried not to overthink it, but doubts started creeping into my mind. I decided to confront her when she got back. "Hey, how was the trip?" I asked as she walked through the door, setting down her suitcase. She gave me that same smile she always used to disarm me. "It was good, productive. Long, though. I'm exhausted." I waited a moment before casually mentioning the photo. "I saw Jenny posted something from the trip. Looked like you guys were having fun." Her face barely flickered, but I caught it. The slightest hint of surprise, maybe even fear. "Oh yeah, that. We went out for drinks one night after a long day, just to unwind." "And the guy you were sitting with? Who's that?" She hesitated, then quickly recovered. "That's Greg. He's a client. Totally harmless." Something in her tone wasn't right. It was too smooth, too rehearsed. But I didn't push it. Not yet. Over the next few months, I started paying more attention to her behavior. The late nights became more frequent, and she seemed even more emotionally distant. It was like she was living a separate life, and I was just a background character. My suspicions grew, but I still couldn't bring myself to fully confront her. Then one night, I got my proof. She was in the shower, and her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Normally, I wouldn't even think about snooping through her phone, but something inside me snapped. I grabbed it and unlocked it. She hadn't changed her passcode. What I saw confirmed everything. There were dozens of texts between her and this Greg guy. The messages were explicit, full of flirtation, and worse, plans to meet up. My heart was pounding as I scrolled through them. They'd been seeing each other for months, and it wasn't just the emotional betrayal. They'd been sleeping together. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. This wasn't just a one-time mistake. She had been lying to me for nearly a year. I put the phone down just as she stepped out of the bathroom, her hair wrapped in a towel. She didn't notice anything was off at first, but I could barely look at her. "I'm going to bed," I said abruptly, not trusting myself to confront her in that moment. I needed to process it. I needed to figure out what to do. I didn't sleep that night. My mind was racing, torn between heartbreak and rage. I couldn't believe that the woman I'd loved for so long, the woman I'd built a life with, had been cheating on me behind my back. I thought about confronting her right then and there, throwing her out of the house. But something stopped me. No, I thought. That's too easy. I wanted revenge. I wanted her to feel the same betrayal, the same humiliation that I was feeling. I didn't want to just expose her affair. I wanted to destroy her, socially, emotionally, and professionally. And so, I started planning. The first thing I did was gather more evidence. Over the next few weeks, I played the part of the unsuspecting husband, all the while collecting screenshots of her texts, photos, and any other proof I could find. I even hired a private investigator to follow her on the nights she claimed to be working late. It didn't take long for the investigator to confirm what I already knew. I had everything I needed. Once I had all the evidence, I began executing my plan. Step 1 was social media. I knew Sarah cared deeply about her image. Her Instagram was carefully curated to show off our perfect life. I decided to use that to my advantage. I created a new Instagram account under a fake name, using a generic stock photo as my profile picture. I followed a few random accounts to make it look legitimate. Then, I started posting. My first post was a simple quote. "The truth always comes out in the end." It didn't take long for people to start liking it. I kept the account active, posting cryptic messages and quotes about betrayal, lies, and infidelity. Nothing too obvious, just enough to pique curiosity. Then, after a few weeks, I posted the bombshell. I uploaded a series of screenshots, texts between Sarah and Greg, photos of them together at hotels, everything. I captioned it, "When you think you know someone, but the truth is much darker." I made sure to tag her in the post. Within minutes, the post went viral. Friends, family, and even coworkers started messaging me, shocked by what they were seeing. I watched as the comments flooded in, people expressing disbelief, anger, and disappointment. Sarah's carefully crafted image was crumbling before my eyes. But I wasn't done. Step 2 was her career. Sarah had worked hard to climb the corporate ladder at her marketing firm, but I knew that in her line of work, reputation was everything. I sent the screenshots and photos to her boss, anonymously, of course. I knew they had a strict policy about workplace relationships, and Greg was a client. It didn't take long for the consequences to hit. She was called into a meeting the next day and was fired on the spot. Greg too. The fallout was swift. Sarah's world was collapsing, and she had no idea I was behind it all. When she came home that night, she was a wreck. I pretended to be shocked when she told me about losing her job, about the Instagram posts, about everything. She had no idea that I'd been orchestrating it all from the beginning. I let her wallow in her misery for a while, before I finally confronted her. One evening, after she'd spent the day crying and trying to figure out how her life had spiraled out of control, I sat her down. "I know," I said simply. Her eyes widened in panic. "What do you mean?" "I know about Greg. I know about the affair. I've known for a while." The color drained from her face. "No, it's not." "Don't even try to lie," I interrupted. "I've seen the texts, the photos. I've hired a private investigator. I know everything." She was silent for a moment, tears welling in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I never meant for it to go this far." "Sorry?" I laughed bitterly. "You're only sorry because you got caught. If I hadn't found out, you'd still be sneaking around behind my back." She didn't have anything to say to that. She just sat there, crying softly, as the weight of her actions sank in. "I've already filed for divorce," I told her coldly. "And I'm keeping the house. I've spoken to a lawyer. You're not getting anything." Her head snapped up at that, panic flashing in her eyes. "Wait, what? You can't do that." "I can," I said firmly, "and I will. You've destroyed this marriage. You've destroyed everything we had. Now you'll deal with the consequences." I stood up and walked to the door. "Pack your things. I want you out by the end of the week." She begged, pleaded, tried to apologize again, But I didn't care. I'd spent too long being the fool. Now, it was her turn to feel powerless. By the end of the week, she was gone, and I was left with a strange sense of satisfaction. It wasn't just the fact that I'd exposed her for what she was. It was that I'd taken control of my life again. She had tried to destroy me, but in the end, she was the one who lost everything. I know revenge isn't the healthiest way to deal with betrayal, but I don't regret it. Sarah deserved every bit of what happened to her. She thought she could live two lives, deceive me, and come out unscathed. But she underestimated me. In the end, I'm stronger for it. And as for Sarah, well, she's just a memory now. A reminder of what can happen when you betray the wrong person. That's my story. That's how I got rid of my cheating wife. And trust me, I don't miss her. Not one bit.